Thank you, Marco. Well, full room, so it's really a pleasure to have you all here. Benvenuti. Benvenuti a tutti quanti. This is a special edition of our Digital Diplomacy series dedicated to artificial intelligence. Today's event is special for several reasons. The first is that our Prime Minister Meloni, has made of artificial intelligence one of the main priorities of the G7. As you know, Italy is holding the presidency of the G7 for 2024. One of the issues that will be discussed also at the summit in Puglia, in Borgo Egnazia, mid-June, 13 to 15 of June. At a forum held today in Rome on artificial intelligence for Italy, our Prime Minister reaffirmed their vision, and she said, artificial intelligence is the greatest revolution of our time and is also the main challenge we have ahead. It is a technology that can unleash all its positive potential only if its development moves within a framework of ethical rules that place human beings, their rights, and their needs at the center. The second reason why this event is, let's say, special is because it's timely. As of tomorrow, in the Italian cities of Verona and Trento, we will host the G7 ministerial meeting on industry, technology, and digital. And of course, artificial intelligence will be front and center in the discussion, so our ambition is also contribute to those ministerial meetings. And finally, our event is special because of the presence in video from Rome of Paolo Benanti, President of the Italian Commission on Artificial Intelligence, a member of the UN Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence. Father Benanti has been delving into ethical frameworks for artificial intelligence, algocracy, and algorithmics, since well before this concept became known to, let's say, the great public, maybe not even the great public. We are looking forward to his keynote tonight. And of course, I'd like to thank him very much, also because he's late in Rome. Thank you for being here. Artificial intelligence is everywhere. Its application can serve the best causes, such as medicine and healthcare, as well as the worst, such as wars, as we are seeing very well in Europe, in Ukraine. It plays a key role in the social media landscape, perfectly fitting in our digital diplomacy conversations. When the embassy launched the series 12 years ago, our main focus was the development of social media and how governments could use platforms like Twitter and Facebook to create a direct dialogue with audiences around the world and at home. Fast forward to today, social media are still part of the political discourse, but the focus is on the danger of disinformation, data security breach, cyber risks. Artificial intelligence has only intensified the debate around social media and technology in general. Coming to the focus of today's talk, people are often asking whether artificial intelligence will ever replace their jobs, for instance. It's a question we could ask ourselves. What about my job as an ambassador? I have two ambassadors here, the ambassador of Ukraine and the ambassador of Monaco. Thank you for being here. What will happen to our jobs, for instance, when artificial intelligence will be able to analyze so quickly, to provide solutions so quickly? I don't know, is there a future for diplomacy? And that's, of course, a question that everyone can ask in its own field of work. These are important questions. They impact the very core of our economy and of our social fabric. The job market and the human capital it relies on. What is the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor ecosystems? What about programs for skilling the workforce of the future? Prime Minister Meloni raised this particular angle, the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor market, in a very recent meeting here in Washington with President Biden on March 1st. There was a really good conversation between the President and the Prime Minister on the challenges of artificial intelligence. Today, we are happy to host representatives from different sectors, from the White House to the big tech, the IMF, and the unions. They'll bring us different perspectives on artificial intelligence, from jobs and the global economy to cybersecurity, from complex language models and the large data set they feed from, to ethical and philosophical paradigms. Artificial intelligence has opened a completely new world in front of us. And let's not forget our present reality, our traditions, our values, and what make us humans so special. Grazie to our speakers. Grazie to Kat Zakrzewski of the Washington Post for moderating tonight's discussion. I'm very much looking forward to it, as well as to the keynote speech of Father Benanti. Thank you so much.
Take the floor again just for a minute. A thorough, complete presentation of Father Benanti would take half of our time at least, but I will just say very few words to complement what the ambassador said, greeting him. Father Paolo Benanti is a Catholic Franciscan friar, a theologian, an ethicist, professor and author of many publications. He's a member of the UN Advisory Board on AI, and since January this year, the president of the Italian National Commission on AI. Since 2008, he's been a professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, at the Theological Institute of Assisi, and at the Pontifical College Leoniano in Anagni. In February 2021, Pope Francis appointed him as an ordinary member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, that he had already joined in 2018 as a corresponding member. He has worked for years now, among many other subjects, on the development of algorithms, an ethical approach to AI, the interplay of AI with human behavior, its societal impact. He has contributed to the development of the Rome Call for AI Ethics in 2020 and to its promotion. The Rome Call is widely considered a milestone in the development of a humanistic approach to technology. I'll really stop here. Thank you again, Father Benanti, for being with us. I leave you with the virtual floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all the ambassadors. Thank you to the Italian ambassador that invited me. It's for me a pleasure to be also virtually with you, especially in the Washington Embassy, a place that it's really dear to me because during my PhD in Georgetown was a place that I was used to come to. What an ethicist could bring to the discussion about AI in a diplomacy milieu? Well, probably the same question arises from the approach of ethical of technology. Ethics of technology, as I learned during my study in the United States, is not just a matter of looking for a normative approach, but is questioning technology. Any kind of technological artifact, once it's deployed inside a social reality, it's simple form of power and a shaping of order inside society. Well, and how we can understand AI in that perspective? To answer this question, let me briefly to be back to the history of computer and computational resource in the Western society. Computer was developed during World War II and was a tool that simply allowed the Ally to win the World War II. Colossus in UK, Bletchley Park, and ENIAC in the United States was two tools that simply shape the way in which we are handling organization and situation inside the army. After the end of World War II, the discovery of transistor allowed computational power to spread in the civil society. During the 50s and the 60s, the main company transformed the process inside themselves thanks to the mainframe, a central unit with all the computational power that was simply used to be accessed by all the people inside an organization. But what really changed at one point was what happened in the 70s when the guys from Silicon Valley, HP, Hewlett-Packard, or the same Steve Jobs, or the guys from Redmond with Microsoft, think this simple start to disaggregate this concentrated computational power in the mainframe, giving to every one of us a personal computational power. Is the era of personal computer. Is it interesting also the effect that it had in society? 1983 Time make the Man of the Year on 1982 that was not a human beings, but was a machine. And the title of the first number of Time in 1983 was Computers Move In, with this gray shaded man near a personal computer, and the editorial simple say it is awake, young, it will teach to your kids. So we was shocked about how the personal computer could change our life. And the next history was the arrival of laptop up to the first decades of this century, when the personal computational power take the shape of the smartphone. The smartphone is the signature of a changing moment in which the personal computational power start to live inside our pockets. And well, let us think what happened. You know, after World War II, liberal democracy, free market, and well-being start to spread around the world as a unique things. In the ending of the last century, after Fukuyama wrote The End of History, we start to separate free market, well-being, and liberal democracy. But if we go to the end of the first decade of this century, the presence of the smartphone and the Arabic Spring told us and tell to us that the digital and the personal computational power could be the best ally of liberal democracy. The Arabic Spring told us that with digital we can have free of speech and the values of liberal democracy can spread in society. 10 years later, with the riots of Capitol Hill, a really dark page in the recent history, we start to consider the digital and the smartphone with fake news and things like that like the worst enemy of liberal democracy. What happened in these 2 decades of this century? Well, that from 2010 and go on, the simple market arrived in the digital platform, and our digital life was in the middle of a commercial battle that simple produced bubble filter, polarization, and things like that. But at the end of the second decades, there is another things that simple show us how our life was transformed by the personal computational power. The pandemic told us that a lot of our life could be lived digitally, could be lived in a digital space without any problem. So we can give our identity, we can make payment, we can make a wire transfer, we can follow lecture of making work in digital space thanks to our personal computational power that is symbolized by the smartphone. And so what happened in the second decades of this century is that normal life process was, without too much noise, digitized, moved in the digital space thanks to the personal computational power, and that kind of process dematerialized themselves. So also our social and public life become in some way digital. We can express that with a synthetic terms that could be computational democracy. All the part of life that we simple move in the digital space, thanks to the personal computational power, it's a form of computational democracy. Now we are in the mid, almost 2024, of these new decades in which AI moves. And what happened? That our personal computational power now it's blurred because AI happened in a new centralized form, that is the cloud forms. And with a difference from the first decades after World War II in the 50s and in the 60s, because that kind of centralization simple ping on an analogous society. This new form of centralization is also a centralization of all the process that we have shared in society through digital platform. So all our life, all computational democracy that we have built up during the last decades now could be centralized in the cloud thanks to the AI and this new kind of services. If we look well at what the huge big companies are doing also in this digital space, the injection and the infusion of these AI tools inside our operative system simple blur the difference between the process that will happen in my personal computational power and the kind of process that instead will happen in a centralized cloud computational power. And this is a challenge. This is what before was understood as algocracy. That could be a challenge for liberal democracy and for the idea of autonomous power and computing and self-determination in an age in which we blur the difference between my personal computational power and centralized computational power. We can have a diplomatic framework and geopolitical framework of AI impacting society in this new challenge of blurring difference from my personal identity and computational power and what will happen in the rest of these decades with the infusion of AI in our process and in our life. So I, as an ethicist, I have the privilege to have the possibility to make question and not giving any answer to that. The beautiful things to make in the ethicist is simple to question in technology and allow the other player, the other stakeholder, to try to give the best answer possible to the question that arise in societal impact of this new technology. I'm glad to have the possibility to address you with these short keynotes, and I hope that the rest of your panel go for the best of this season in which G7 is with the Italian Presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and have a nice continuation of this kind of event.
Thank you, Father Benanti. All right, we can actually move now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We now move to the second part of the event, and I want to ask the panel to join us on stage. Amanda Ballantyne of AFL-CIO, Olivia Igbokwe-Curry of AWS, Giovanni Melina from the International Monetary Fund, Seeyew Mo of the Office of the National Cyber Director at the White House, Chan Park, OpenAI, and Zakrzewski of the Washington Post. She will moderate our conversation. Kat is a national technology reporter at the Washington Post. She joined the Post in 2018 after working as a reporter for Wall Street Journal Pro Venture Capital. She has also been published in TechCrunch, the Boston Globe, USA Today, and the Chicago Sun-Times. Just a few fun facts about Kat. In this year, I read 18 articles, and AI was mentioned 250 times. So quite a bit. She has quoted Michael McFaul at Stanford University's Poly Institute as describing OpenAI's policy head as the de facto foreign minister of one of the most important companies in the world. And she said tech companies traditionally shun Washington until trouble emerges. Today we have a few tech companies with us, so we're very happy, alongside representatives of different sectors, public and private. We're very happy to have you here moderating our event, Kat, and very happy to have you all here for this discussion tonight. So, Kat, you have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm so excited for this panel tonight because we have a lot of different perspectives here. That was a wonderful introduction from Father, and I'm curious to see if our panel can come up with some of the answers to these questions that he raised tonight. And so we just heard a little bit about OpenAI's political strategy and the reporting that I've been doing on the company in recent months. And so, Chan, I wanted to start with you tonight on this panel. We are approaching a vote tomorrow on the EU AI Act, perhaps the most significant AI legislation that we've seen to date. Where does OpenAI stand on this legislation, especially in light of some of the provisions that they introduced around foundation models?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us, and thank you for moderating, Kat. We're excited for the continued engagement with the EU. I think what we are excited about is just that there's been engagement with industry, and that there's been a proportionate sort of tailoring of how the regulations would approach different models based on their risks as well. We frankly have to wait and see. I think there's going to be some implementation based on the code, laying out the code of practice and the ways in which it's going to be implemented. So I think we're looking forward to continuing to engage with the EU and the AI office as well.
And last year, there were some reports taken from Sam Altman's comments that OpenAI might have to consider pulling out of Europe based on the legislation that was being considered. Sam later clarified those comments, but just where we are at today, is OpenAI considering pulling out of Europe because of this legislation?
I'm not aware of any plans to pull out of Europe at this point. That would be a big surprise to my European colleagues.
And Olivia, I want to turn to you now because we are, at a point where the U.S. Congress is also considering its own path forward when it comes to AI legislation. You've got the committee that just formed in the House of Representatives working on this issue, as well as the gang in the Senate. Are there lessons that you think U.S. lawmakers can learn from the EU AI Act as they craft their own bill?
Yeah, I definitely think that U.S. lawmakers look to the EU AI Act for both opportunities to learn and maybe mistakes not to make. We support risk-based regulation that will spark innovation, help innovation grow, but also regulation that is going to assure that AI is developed and deployed responsibly. I think if you look at the recent House AI Task Force, is what you're referencing, it's a very wide gamut of legislators. You have a member of the Freedom Caucus and you have a member of the Progressive Caucus. You have a medical doctor. You have the only physicist in Congress with Bill Foster. You have it led by Jay Obernolte and Ted Lieu, both with science backgrounds, both who have familiarity with the issue. So if you look at it, you could see that the leaders of the caucus, of both sides of the caucus, Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries, really thought about who they placed on that AI task force and were really thoughtful about it to assure that not only did it represent a wide range of thoughts and ideas across the delegation, but also looking at the particular subject matter expertise that each member of the task force would bring in. And I think it was very thoughtful. And in reference to the gang, which is what the Senate calls their equivalent of this AI task force, is that same. Leader Schumer has been very thoughtful. He had a series of closed-door forums with members where it was a balance of academia, industry, and third parties. And I think that's really important to get a wide range of ideas so that we are really thoughtful in the legislation that is going to be incredibly important. As we said earlier today, AI touches so many parts of our lives. So we need to ensure that we get this right.
And you mentioned that U.S. lawmakers could learn from some of the mistakes that we've seen in Europe. What would you classify as mistakes when it comes to the EU AI Act?
I think what I will say is, to focus on the positive, I think when the EU rolled out like GDPR, I don't think there was as much collaboration as maybe we've seen with the EU AI Act, right? Like we've now seen the EU AI Act before it's being passed for years now. So I think there was more collaboration. I think you'll probably see, I can't predict what U.S. lawmakers will actually pass, but I think you'll see more risk-based approaches and more sector-specific regulation, not as overly broad, to ensure that we are having innovative regulation while still making sure that we're focused on risk-based, responsible deployment of AI and development of AI.
And you just mentioned you're not sure what U.S. lawmakers will actually pass. I want to ask the whole panel right now, by a show of hands, how likely do we think it is that Congress passes meaningful AI legislation this year?
This year?
This year.
When you say likely, do we raise it this high?
Yes, on the spot.
Not taking a position here.
All right, so I don't see any hands.
It's something we should
I think
fight
it'll
for.
be.
It's something we should work for.
I'll raise my hand.
Oh, okay, all right. So
It depends how you define meaningful, but I think Congress will act.
all right.
It might be sector-specific.
Okay, so we've got some, maybe some hedging answers, but certainly not a resounding display of hands up. I mean, Amanda, I wanted to ask you a little bit. We're at a point.
Nobody wants to hear from later.
Okay, we could do it in
I think, everyone could still hear us.
It's I hope it's not the AI. The lights here.
So, Amanda, we're already at a point where we're seeing AI impact jobs. And given the fact that, there's some uncertainty about how quickly Congress will move, even the EU AI Act won't fully take effect until 2 years after the vote. I mean, are policymakers moving quickly enough to protect workers from the risks of AI?
I think it's important that policymakers move quickly. I also think it's important that policymakers have a deep understanding of the really significant ways that these technologies impact workers and civil society more broadly. So I do think it's important to have deliberation and education. I think the Biden administration has taken a good, strong lead with its executive order and the OMB implementation. There's a lot of work happening on those issues, and that certainly touches workers. The labor movement is very actively engaged in conversations with the administration about guardrails and about how to do innovation responsibly in a way that really includes workers. I think that Congress has a big job ahead of it. I mean, the ways that these technologies, there's so many use cases, right? And so how do you think really through kind of setting those priorities and then creating the right stakeholders around the table? I think that the tech industry is much further along in understanding these technologies, but maybe not as grounded in how they impact real people every day. Mm-hmm. We need to bring civil society along, and we need to ensure that civil society is really actively participating in a robust way in the legislation that Congress develops.
Can I just jump
Of
on
course.
that? Because she brought up about the Biden administration. Like, look, we are moving with urgency, right, with this EO. We keep thinking about artificial intelligence. Sometimes we forget about real intelligence, which are people. So we know that AI will be disruptive, but in any disruption in technology, there's an opportunity here to make sure that we can actually mitigate the risk and also like make sure that the technology holds promises up, right? Which is why in the EO, we have a study to make sure that how AI will affect the labor market, for example, right? We also promote best practices to make sure that things will protect workers and advance workers, right? Like my day job right now is I'm talking about a lot about cyber workforce, not about cybersecurity, but about cyberspace workforce. When you think about not including the rest of Americans, the rest of people here we talk about in this transition, then it serves like an anchor that's holding back the economy. So it's in our interest to make sure that more people are involved in this process, to make sure that more people can actually benefit from this transition, or else we won't be doing as well as we could be.
And on that point, one of the big focuses of the AI executive order is, of course, bringing AI talent into government.
Yep.
What do you see as the biggest barriers today when it comes to recruiting the best and brightest in AI to the U.S. government?
I am not going to waste your time in listing the barriers right now, but I can tell you that we are working every single day to remove those barriers. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet in removing barriers for hiring and getting the best talent into the federal government. What I would pitch, though, is that on April 18th, we are running an AI tech search, talent search. So for those who are interested to work for us in the US government, go sign up on tech2gov.org. We're going to have an event on April 18th hiring the best talent. But all kidding aside, what we need to change in outlook and policy, as well as we need to change in the way we talk about the job. For a long time, we don't talk about the mission of the federal government or the government in general. We don't talk about how technology and the job can actually affect people. In reality, a lot of the federal government jobs are not just in Washington, D.C. A lot of the federal government jobs live across in the country, across the United States, right? As more and more of cyber technology, like cyberspace technology, AI, gets into our daily devices, right? Door locks, cars, right? It's virtually indistinguishable. We need the best talent that we have in the federal government to make sure that we can actually work with our private sector partners and unions and civil society to make sure we can craft a policy that will benefit as many people as possible.
Do you think you can get the best talent in the federal government when there's such a disparity between government salaries and the salaries we see from the companies on this side?
I'm not going to compete with OpenAI on how much you pay. But what I would say is this. I see the smartest people at work every day. And they are at the White House because they want to make a big impact. And I would urge, I'm an American, I work at the White House. I'm very proud of my country, but I would say to anyone in the audience today or online that there's no service better than public service. And then we are not asking people to come in to work traditional, like when I talk about Outlook, generally we think that a civil servant would serve 10, 15, 20 years. But in a lot of our approach today, we're bringing people for 2 years, 4 years. We're bringing people for fellowship. So we are making a lot of these changes, a lot of this innovation to make sure that people can see working in the government or working in, I would say, with a labor union or in public sector as a way to serve the public as one step or one chapter in their career. And that's what I would urge everyone to consider.
And while we're on the topic of labor and AI workforce issues, Giovanni, I want to bring you in to talk a little bit about the research and the work that you've been doing for the IMF. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your initial findings around what jobs might be impacted initially by artificial intelligence and the impact that could have on global economies?
Sure. You know, the bottom line of our report is that about 40% of jobs worldwide are exposed to AI. And this figure becomes 60% in advanced economies, posing both risks and opportunities. But behind these aggregate numbers, there is a huge heterogeneity. And specifically, there is heterogeneity in the types of jobs in how different types of jobs are affected by AI. There are some jobs where AI is unlikely to replace the human. And these are, for example, the ambassador before was asking whether her job is going to be replaced. And I think not anytime soon, because that is a type of job where human judgment is key. And so in those type of jobs, although AI may help because it may make workers more productive, still ultimately the decisions are in the hands of the worker. But on the other hand of the spectrum, there are also other types of workers where the risk of displacement is much higher. And these are jobs that, for example, are clerical jobs that perform more routine tasks, or telemarketers, where you know, the impact of human judgment is less key in the performance of the task.
And so on that point, we have the White House on the panel with us today. What should policymakers be thinking about then when they think about the future of education and how we train the workforce given those shifts?
Yeah, and this is precisely also the topic of another section of our report that looks at countries' preparedness to adopt AI. And we focus specifically on several indicators of preparedness that go beyond, for example, digital infrastructure, regulation, and so on and so forth. It also looks at the skills and whether in the economy there are enough digital skills, whether there is training, but also whether there are labor market policies that facilitate the transition of workers that may be displaced by AI to other types of jobs where AI can be a complementary tool.
And I saw you nodding there, Amanda, if you want to jump in.
Oh, I think that's key. And I think that when we think also in the labor movement about how AI and data-driven tech will impact jobs, there's a question, you know, we point to the stenographer problem. You know, when personal computers became commercially available, hundreds of thousands of women lost their jobs, like in the space of a year, because they had a special technical skill to use a certain kind of transposition machine. And there will be some jobs that AI does that to. I think admin will be hit heavily. There are other sectors which really are entry-level pathways to work, you know, and so you have to think about not only what sectors will be hit, but what populations have access to those jobs, and what are those jobs pipelines to? There are other ways AI will impact jobs, de-skilling, algorithmic management, and the degradation of work. And that is something that really innovation can solve if we have public policy that incentivizes human-centric design, where we're actually using tech to augment human ingenuity. So I don't think I think the rush to regulate should be a rush to make sure this tech is actually working for working people, not just I mean, certainly we need guardrails, but we need to really dig deep in research and development funding and start setting values around how technology makes our lives better, right? And so what you're talking about, I think, points to that. Not only how are we making sure that technology is designed to augment human capability instead of make our jobs worse, And then how do we use civil society institutions to create new pathways? In Europe, a lot of countries have social dialogue. We don't have that in the United States. We have labor unions in the private sector, they're weak. And we really need to think through the role of labor as a really important civil society institution to help people make those transitions. Otherwise, I think we would say we see impacts like deindustrialization, and we see more January 6th in our future, right? So this is a real important moment for social values, and particularly in the United States.
And on that point, I want to bring the company perspective into this conversation. I mean, Chan, from your perspective at OpenAI, what responsibility does OpenAI feel to address, the impact that the technology you're releasing might have on workers and on the labor movement?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I reframe it not so much as releasing technology sort of on people, but I think that's the whole point of our company, is developing AGI for the benefit of humanity, with humanity, in conversation with humanity. And I want to actually touch on something Giovanni was talking about, right, in terms of the study, which I read through. I thought was incredibly interesting, talking about exposure and relevance. And I think the extent to which, frankly, there's also risks if folks are not exposed, right? There's potential risk if you're not exposed. If you don't have AI in your life, the relevance diminishes and the potential also diminishes. And so, as we're talking certainly here in the US, but it's a global audience or global conversation about whether or not you're losing potential and you're in fact increasing the possibility for global inequality if you don't have that, certainly the guardrails, certainly the conversation with labor, but if you don't have even the exposure to begin with, that's a problem. But back to your question, I think we have a responsibility certainly on the research. We're doing our own research, but we also need to be in conversation with labor, in conversation with civil society more broadly, to find out, frankly, more what works for them, how it can be an actual tool that augments not just their livelihoods, but their lives, and figuring out what the best path forward might be together.
Olivia, and how is Amazon thinking about this?
I think one of the main things in the crux of the issues is ensuring that there's upskilling, reskilling, and workforce development, especially in non-traditional tech communities. Like getting into the communities that won't be left behind, whether it's focusing on community colleges, vocational schools, HBCUs, historically black universities and colleges, historically black community colleges, minority-serving institutions, vocational programs that don't require a 2 or 4 year education, like upskilling and reskilling, because there's so many jobs that this tech will create, right? There's so many types of innovation. For instance, we have a program called fusion splicing, which is the fiber optic cables that go under our data centers. That is a program that's a 6-week program, and for you to get that job. And it doesn't require a 4-year, even a 2-year education, but it's the crux, it's the infrastructure behind this technology. And so it's making sure that there's exposure to communities that traditionally have not had exposure to tech, or what they assumed were tech jobs that one would assume would need a computer science degree or a 4-year education. I think that's incredibly important.
That's definitely a priority for us as well. I think President Biden has been really focused on making sure that we're connecting Americans to good paying jobs, right, in the past 3 years or so. One of the shifts, and one mindset shift that we want to think about is switch to a skill-based approach in hiring, in teaching, in education, right? So in the US, we talk about the 3 R's of education, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now I think we should consider adding 4 R's, cyber, right? Trying to make sure that people have those basic skills so that by the time they graduate from the high school, they can do certain type of work with some training, right? And then we're also encouraging private sector employers to sort of like see the potential in the individual, right? You can hire somebody, you can train them on their job with the skills that you need them to do without using 4-year college degrees as sort of like an unnecessary barrier in our point of view, right? So that's why a lot of times in a lot of the work that we do now, we visit community college to make sure that their students have opportunities to get some of these jobs. One of the innovations that we're doing now is we're removing some of the college degrees requirement in federal hiring so that we can start getting the best talent no matter whether get the skills, when or how to get those skills. As long as you have the skills, you can do the job, you can serve the country, we want you to be in the government.
I think we agree on a lot of elements of training. Training is really critical in this moment, but it's not just the skills, right? Skills are important, and making sure that in this moment, there's sort of universal appreciation of the skills it takes to do certain jobs so that we're not just training to one employer and one job that might go away.
Yeah.
One of the things we learned from deindustrialization is people can't just pick up and move when the industry in their region changes. And so we really need to think about sort of a just transition strategy. How do you create worker-centric training programs that give workers portability to move? And that involves not only creating sort of universal skills platforms that are widely recognized by many employers, really centering the worker in the development of the skills, so you're not just teaching to the skills, but you're also teaching their professional development. And then it's the pipelines, right? Workers don't just have access to the networks that those of us who run around DC have, right? And so it's how do you connect the institutions where workers actually exist, right? So it's labor unions, it's local community groups, it's churches, with educational institutions like high schools, like community colleges. We have to think of an ecosystem approach to making sure that people have mobility.
I almost want to give you a high five because that's what we're trying to do.
And Giovanni, I want to give you a chance to respond to that. I mean, we're having a very US-centric discussion right now about the path forward. But as we think about how AI will disrupt economies on the global scale, I mean, what implications does that have for the future of international policies?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question because our study focuses also on cross-country differences, and if we look at poorer countries, these are countries where the degree of exposure to AI is lower, but also the degree of readiness for AI is also lower. So these are countries where the immediate risks from AI are lower, but at the same time, the potential to harness AI is also weaker. And so given that AI promises to increase productivity, growth, and to lift the level of incomes, if these countries miss the boat, then their income levels are going to stagnate relative to the growth of incomes in advanced economies. And so this may lead to a greater divergence between richer and poorer nations.
If I can add to that, I think there's two things. So we need to assure that we have international standards, so that the global standards, so that there is international interoperability in terms of regulation. Two, one thing I want to really touch on, in the White House has definitely focused on this, especially the Vice President has talked about the need that the Global South is involved in this conversation in every area, whether it's workforce, whether it's representation, et cetera. I'm sure we have customers that we can speak to that work, that address the needs of the Global South and do their business in the Global South, and just seeing the difference of, for instance, using generative AI for oncology, for cancer screenings, especially in countries where there are 8 oncologists in the entire country. I think that's where the importance is, and we can't leave behind the Global South in terms of data, in terms of assuring that they're a part of the conversation, that they're being considered in the conversation, that they're being included. And that also takes us back to the need for connectivity in the Global South. You can be exposed to whatever, but if you don't have reliable connectivity, that also is such a hindrance that's going to completely continue to widen the gap.
Right now, we had the UK AI Safety Summit last year, got a lot of attention. One of the big criticisms was that the Global South did not play a central role in some of those discussions. There's a number of different initiatives. The UN has its work. I mean, what do you think the current state of affairs is? Is enough being done to draw the Global South into these conversations?
I do think that I know that the State Department is working on assuring that the Global South is a part of this conversation, and it's a priority of the administration. So I do think that the conversations are happening. Whether or not, the Global South will be it's not the next 2 Safety Summit locations, but I think that's going to be changing. I think India is going to have a huge part of this conversation. And throughout Africa, you're going to see, just with population density, that you cannot ignore the population at all, and they need to also be a part of this conversation in order for the technology, honestly, to be the most fair, to be the most unbiased. It's all going to come through the need of having more representation throughout.
And we're going to open this up to audience questions in just a few minutes, but before we get to that, on this topic, we have elections coming up in India, elections obviously coming up in the United States, the EU. Thinking ahead, Jan, what steps is OpenAI taking to ensure that its products aren't abused to spread disinformation during the election?
Yeah, I mean, we're taking it very seriously, obviously, as everybody is. We've certainly have usage policies against using the products for campaigning or lobbying or political activities. Certainly have our safety systems and working to try and make sure that there aren't, there isn't misinformation being generated through the API in that regard. One of the things that we're really trying to do is direct people to authoritative content, and so we're partnering with the National Association of Secretary of State, this is at least in the US, to make sure folks are asking where they want to vote, how do I vote, that's not OpenAI's opinion, that we're directing them to the National Association of Secretaries of State or to the election administrators to try to make sure they're getting the actual information that is authoritative.
And from the view of the White House, I mean, we're now, less than a year out from the US election. The White House took several steps around voluntary pledges from the industry last year to address some of these concerns of disinformation, but are the companies doing enough?
I'm not at liberty to say. I think it's one of those things that is so sort of tough. Like to make this work, we have to work collaboratively. I think, if we have feedback, we'll let them know. I think it's not something that we want to kind of air it out in public.
I see. All right. Well, Amanda, it looks like you've got something to say.
Well, I mean, I do think that we can learn a lot from the use of social media in the United States, the sort of lack of regulation around social media and sort of voluntary commitments that companies have made over the years, and look at sort of the state of information in our democracy, right? And so I think, again, this is a moment where I think big tech and social media platforms and generative AI platforms really need to do more. I think there need to be industry-level agreements about elections, information, and data. And I think, there needs to be the ability to identify and prosecute misinformation schemes that disrupt democracy. This is an important issue in the United States, but it is an important issue in many, many countries around the globe. And, and our democracy in some ways does hang in the balance. I think we all know that right now in terms of the stakes of this election in the United States. So I think what the labor movement would say that there are a lot of policy proposals on the table, and there could be a much more serious concerted effort by industry to clean up some of the mess that we might see coming down the pike.
And on that topic, right before we open this up to everyone for questions, I just wanted to run through and do a quick rapid fire round with our panelists. So for this round, I'll ask a question, and if everyone could just give a one-word answer. So Giovanni, we'll start with you. What is the AI threat that keeps you up at night?
Inequality.
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 Access and inequality, so 3 words.
Inequality.
See, we all agree.
I mean, that's 3, lack of access.
All right. Well, it seems like we have some agreement on one topic here tonight on this panel. And now I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. Okay. If you want to maybe in the row here.
Hi, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. My name is Rowan. I lead partnerships for Monday.com's philanthropic arm, so big tech, private sector, social responsibility. One of the things to the theme that you said about inequality, when when AI disrupted our entire universe, we looked at our philanthropic mission, which was to close the digital divide in nonprofits worldwide, and said, wait a minute, what about the future of work? And what about preparing youth for the future of work? So we've launched a series of trainings to bring youth accessibility to AI in the context of social impact. And we're one tech company. And one of the things that I wanted to ask all of you, how do we accelerate education in a way where private, public sector comes together? You noted upskilling, and there's a lot that the educational, governmental institutions can do, but I think we do have a responsibility, a social one, for everyone to be involved, and that I think is one of the keys to make sure that inequality isn't a major factor in the AI revolution. Thank you.
I'll jump in, I'll kick it off started. I think back to the word that you were using earlier, ecosystem approach, right? So a lot of times, we look so much inwards, like we are the company, we want to do something, but I will kind of turn it around to sort of say, like, what does the society, the community needs you to do right now? I think a lot of times in a company or any organization, you ought to reach out to the ecosystem that is already in place to really learn what the community or what the school district, what the unions, what the chambers are already working on or not working on, and then sort of like find a solution that way. And a very US-centric answer, unfortunately, but like in the US, different regions have sort of like different needs. Like different, a company like Monday.com can really help in different ways. In southeastern part, you have more military bases, so jobs are different there, access are different there, compared to the West Coast or the East Coast or the Midwest. So a lot of times, taking that approach of like location-based, worker and people-centric, to really ask a question like, what is needed to be done that is not being done right now to solve that problem is what I would encourage not just company, but philanthropic arm, as well as I would say, federal government, that's the approach that we're taking now from the White House in terms of making sure that we have the workforce that we can have to compete in the 21st century.
All right, next question. Right here in the front row.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Chan, good to see you. My name is Roxy Ndebu Madu. I'm a local elected official in the state, also former big tech, now startup founder. My question is really on the emphasis on public engagement that you talked about. If you look at the United States, and I think this question is relevant globally, there are approximately around 20,000 cities throughout the United States. However, when I look at a lot of your workforce development initiatives or human capital development initiatives, they're concentrated towards major metropolitan cities. So when I think about the exacerbating rise of inequality on access, exposure, and I look at my own municipality, a lot of people, I would say workers or citizens or whoever lives in that range, are not necessarily ready for this transition. I had a constituent who is coming back into re-entering the workforce say to me the other day, where do I start with AI? I don't even know what to do. Like, I don't even know how to grasp my head around this. So talk to me about how can we reframe the method of public engagement to ensure that not only that our constituents are ready, but really municipalities are ready, because we're not thinking about this on a macro level in terms of AI and automation and efficiency in the government sector. And you talked about a lot of federal government examples, which is great, but I need that to trickle down to state and local as well, and really have a more inclusive approach around how we figure out public engagement.
Other than say that I agree, I don't know what else to say. I think like a lot of times, assuming that question is super answer, for everybody, but I'll jump in. The reality is we need to do a better job, and a lot of White House engagement, we have been going out there more and more. Can we do more? Maybe, but I think a lot of times it's also changing the way that we send the messages out, and I agree with you on that.
Amanda, did you want to jump in there?
Sure. I would say a few things. I think, career and technical education is a really important, powerful tool. I work a lot with universities and engineering schools, and they really say if you start kids like in 3rd grade with career and technical education, that sort of, can really shape someone's life and career. So what do you do about people who have already graduated from high school who might be returning to the workforce, like you said? And I think that there, again, like reliance on and engagement with community organizations where people actually are. And then a focus on really practical skilling. I think with generative AI, sort of how do you design a prompt? How do you actually use the tool effectively to make your work more efficient? That'll keep you competitive in the workforce. So I would say those things, and then I would also say it's really important to foster labor management partnership and relationships around this. So we just had a really, I think, remarkable deal that we cut with Microsoft. Chan was a little bit involved with it before he jumped ship. And that is it's a unique thing. It involves a conversation between workers and Microsoft on skilling. Really, how do you do sort of worker-centric skilling? There's research and development elements of it. And then there's also a broad commitment to really expanding the role of organized labor, which can be an important tool both to help workers navigate changes in the economy, but also a countervailing force to sort of market concentration in tech.
Can I just jump in?
Yes, of course.
Just a couple of quick points. One is, I absolutely agree. I think that there's an important need to get to every community out there, both in the US as well as around the world. I will say, at least from our experience at OpenAI, talking to our partners on the strategic partnership side, as well as folks who are doing engagement with different governments, there's a lot of excitement among state and local governments. In fact, in some ways, they're nimbler, faster, more, it's easier in some ways to actually adopt AI into some of the governmental systems as well as the workforce. And in some ways, there's more opportunity there. I absolutely agree. There needs to be more education and kind of outreach there. But I think there is real excitement. In some ways, it's harder for us to, in some ways, meet those needs. I will also say, for the folks who are saying, oh, how do I get started? I think it's important for us to dispel the notion that it's too late to get started or that people are behind. Everybody's learning. We're learning, right? I mean, it's all a brand new technology in so many different ways. We're still at the very beginning stages of this sort of transformative period. And I think to Giovanni's point, making sure that everybody is included in that is going to be important, and that folks don't feel like it's already too late. I don't think that's the case.
I actually have one. Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's so much also about community engagement. When we do our investments, the majority of it is really focused around local community. And so it's more of a holistic with looking at the community and the social impact of the investments. So we recently did an announcement for $10 billion investment in the state of Mississippi, the largest investment in Mississippi's history. We're in talks with the schools, local communities, local officials, mayors, et cetera. So getting down to that community level, the policymakers who meet and live in that community and see those constituents daily is incredibly important, because that is the superintendents, the school boards, those are the people who are really, the crux and the heart of these engagements, because they understand what those communities need and how you can have a holistic approach, and where workforce training, job skills, the different various types of jobs and investments of vendors, types of vendors, diversity of vendors, all of that is at the community level.
The one thing I would add is, I just remember this, is that sometimes some people in certain parts of the countries don't want to hear it from the federal government or from the White House, So a lot of times our approach is to make sure that the locally trusted people are making those message for us, right? So one of the examples I will highlight for you is a school district in San Antonio has a career fair, but for the parents. So they would do it at night after school hours, so parents can then kind of learn and then about all these different job opportunities, all these changes, so that they don't feel left behind and they truly have access to content that will be helpful for their kids. So, but that's the superintendent, the school district making those messages, and not us.
All right, back there.
My name is Roger Cochetti, and I'm an editorial contributor on technology and space policy for the Hill newspaper. And one of the topics I've been exploring and trying to understand is the degree to which, or the basic standards in the regulation of AI, and the degree to which the exact same crime should be punished more heavily if AI is used in it, as opposed to if it's done just by a human. For example, impersonation can be a crime, but impersonation with AI, should that be punished more heavily? Deceptive trade practices can be a crime if they're done by humans, but what if they're done by humans using AI? And we have a tendency that is growing now to impose greater penalties for the use of AI in exactly the same crime that could be committed by a human. So I was wondering if anyone on the panel has any thoughts on this. And by the way, there is some precedent. Using a gun to rob somebody is different than just robbing somebody, but there's clearly a worldwide tendency to impose greater penalties for the use of AI in a crime or criminal activity than just a human being do it. And is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Does anyone on the panel have a view on that? Thank you.
Chan, do you want to take that?
I literally had this interior dialogue of don't take the bait, or don't go, don't jump in. But I mean, it's not a bait. I didn't mean to be pejorative in that way. I think it's a really interesting question. I say this, and the reason why I jumped in is my former life was as a prosecutor way back in the day. And I think it's an interesting question. I do agree in the statutory code, whether it's federal or state, you have certain provisions that sometimes have enhancements for use of a deadly weapon. but that's a very defined term there, a deadly weapon, right? I don't think general artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence that are used for general purposes should be cast or framed as a weapon per se. Obviously, we've talked about all the different positive uses of AI. And so I guess my personal, not company policy perspective would be that we should think very carefully about that. I'm not sure if that's the right approach. I think policymakers should look at what is the goal you're trying to achieve with a certain criminal statute or criminal provisions. You know, what victims' rights are you trying to protect? And is it dependent on the medium or the tool that you're using in that particular case? I'm not sure if it is, and obviously different use cases may vary, but I think certainly as we were talking about, we're in very early stages about this, and I think there are already a lot of criminal statutes on the books that would be certainly just as effective as other new ones that might enhance it because of AI.
And we have time for just one more question. I don't want to stand between everyone and their pizza. We go right here in the front row. Yes.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I have a question. You talked about inequality and access. How do you look at satellite data with AI? How can this revisionalize certain industries, and how do you see it looking forward and being applied and giving resources to countries that do not have access to these resources?
Satellite data?
With AI.
With AI. I don't know enough about the satellite data piece of things.
Because, you know, we have, for instance, bad weather or a crop being destroyed or whatever. I mean, this is accessible through satellite data. There's information, oceans also. So how do you see AI applying it to be accessible for?
Yeah, Giovanni, I wonder if it's a bigger question too, just about access to data when it comes
yeah,
to
that's
part of the question.
But also, I mean, I'm not an expert on, as an economist, on satellite data. But what I can say is that, for example, in economic analysis, satellite data are very, very useful. For example, in the context of low-income countries. Even to measure things like GDP, for example. You know, there is a lack of data collection, data access in low-income countries, and so satellite data can be used to, for example, night lights, can be used to gauge economic activity in low-income countries. So if this can be coupled with AI capabilities, the potential is immense. But I think your question is
about
more...
climate change, for instance.
Yeah, climate change. I mean, yeah, that is another area where you know, the potential is really great. But I think your questions also referred on the ability of certain countries or central communities to access this data and whether the cost is low enough, for example. I mean, these are questions that I cannot answer to, but for sure these are you know, very important considerations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, I think that's all the time that we have tonight, unfortunately. Thank you so much to our whole panel for joining us.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You can now join us outside the room for a light reception.
What we should talk about is like how to get DPC involved in things.
Thank you. Sorry to throw some of the topics your way.
I train a lot of
You handled it very well.
It's the nature of the business.
You know, I don't know as much as I should, but maybe we should get coffee together.
Yes, well, give me your card. Do you have a card?
I think you'll have an army of like admirers there.
Oh my God.
Mark almost threw me under the bus in the
Oh my
administration.
gosh.
Can I introduce myself?
Hi.
I'm a proud member of the U.S. government workforce.
Oh, thank you.
I think public service
The way to go.
is a winner.